Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleagues today. We're debating here the concurrence report on a committee report from the Environment Department on the path forward here. But in relation to this, of course, one of the main things we come at here in our dissenting report is that despite claiming that their costly carbon tax would address climate change, the current Liberal government has failed to meet any carbon climate target. This is something that has to be brought forth here very specifically. And in relation to that, the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development Canada provided a report to Parliament, a handful of reports, 5 actually here, just a few weeks ago, in which he illustrated exactly what the government was not accomplishing with all of their efforts in this respect. And when I say efforts, I mean up to 140 programs across government that effectively are spending money and not reducing emissions at all. And I'll go into a lot of the guts of what the report here, particularly the report when he talks about the net zero transition and where we are as far as getting towards net zero in our economy, because he makes some significant statements in this regard, Madam Speaker. He goes on about missing and inconsistent information, delays in launching important measures, and a lack of reliability in projections hindered the credibility of the plan. Now, before I go any further, Madam Speaker, I have to tell you that I'm going to be splitting my time today with my honourable colleague, the member from Louis Saint-Laurent, so that I'll only be speaking for 10 minutes here today. But this whole thing about missing and inconsistent information, delays in launching important measures, and a lack of reliability in projections hindered the credibility of the government's plans. Now recognize that you're getting zero emissions at the end of the day out of all these programs, tens of billions that are being spent on these climate changes, and effectively the latest one, of course, being the emissions cap, which is a pie-in-the-sky thing. We're going to eliminate emissions without putting down production. The only way we're going to actually eliminate emissions in Canada is to undo our economy at this stage. And undoing our economy, especially in our resource production, means those resources are being produced elsewhere, higher emissions, higher labor standards, and less benefit for the world. So we continue on this path of making sure the government is exposed for the folly of their approach to how they're actually trying to get emissions, because those emissions aren't appearing at the end of the day. But I'll go on with the Commissioner's report here. He said the recent decreases to projected 2030 emissions were not due to climate actions taken by governments, but were instead because of revisions to the data or methods used in modeling. Now, for 20 years, the Department of Environment has had a model that is not transparent about how actually they are measuring emissions in the Canadian economy. And that whole model is flawed, as the Environment Commissioner has stated. Nobody can see it, therefore it is effectively flawed. The only way to get emissions, of course, is to change the inputs somewhat in their own modeling. Changing inputs doesn't reduce CO2 in the atmosphere, Madam Speaker. All it does is make your model look like you're accomplishing something when you're accomplishing next to nothing. And what you are accomplishing is the shutdown of the most productive part of the Canadian economy, our resource industry. But that is part of what this government's virtue signaling is all about here. It's about saying we're doing something, but changing the metrics on how we actually measure what we're doing here. So they're trying to fool the Canadian public. And it is deceitful, Madam Speaker. It is something that has to be exposed at its highest level. The Commissioner, not Greg McLean, the Member of Parliament for Calgary Centre, the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development actually said very clearly, you're monkeying with the numbers. And the next monkeying they're going to do, of course, is to include the actual absorption of CO2 embedded in Canada's forests and include that in the numbers to make them look like they've actually accomplished something, although that wasn't part of the inputs from the get-go. There's a whole bunch of quotes here that are very important from the Commissioner, and I'm going to go through a few more of them. The issue of the lack of transparency in the modelling continues to be an ongoing concern, which can undermine the trust and credibility in the reported progress. Guess that. Hear that. Trust and credibility. This government has lost all kinds of trust with Canadians. It has also lost credibility with anybody who's paying attention to emissions and to our energy production systems in Canada that need to be sustained in order for us to continue with our prosperous economy, in order for us to continue as a world leader in emissions reduction. Fully 3/4 of the amount of money spent by private enterprise in this country on climate emissions reductions is spent by the oil and gas industry, making sure they get cleaner production. And that production, specifically in the oil sands, the emissions profile per barrel of oil produced has gone down by 26% in the last 20 years. That outperforms any other industry in Canada as far as the reductions that are associated with technological advances. So when my colleague across the way talks about technology, not taxes, we have clear illustrations of how that works. Businesses spending money on technology as opposed to spending money on taxes actually advance the science and advance the utilization of carbon-reducing emissions. This is what we're after at the end of the day. We want less carbon emissions per unit of production. We want to make sure we have a sustainable economy going forward. We want to replace carbon around the world that's being produced with more carbon efficient and less emitting options available here in Canada. Again, I'll finalize up with a few more quotes from the Commissioner of the Environment here. This lack of transparency meant that accountability for reducing emissions remained unclear. So I beseech my colleagues on the other side of the House, it's not the opposition saying this, it's their own commissioner. The government's Commissioner of Environment and Sustainable Development saying you're not getting anything done. The only thing you're accomplishing in the numbers, and the numbers are down slightly from their peak pre-COVID, they're down a very slight amount. That's not necessarily a result of anything that the programs have designed here. That is a result significantly of changes to the model. Now you can change your input models all you want. At the end, the world is getting more carbon in the atmosphere. We've got to actually get some less carbon in the atmosphere. So find some programs and find some technology that actually accomplishes that. And this government seems strained in that because it's bent towards that whole regulation and control as opposed to innovation and market decisions that are going to be part of the future here that is the solution. I actually said to my constituents, when you've dug a hole this deep, it's time to stop digging. Stop digging. That's the main thing here. You've gone down the rat hole here, and making sure that you're actually producing less emissions is no longer your goal. It's a goal to push more money out the door. And Madam Speaker, I'm particularly worried about this at this point.
Yeah, so I just, when the Honourable was turning his pages, it's hitting the microphones. And so it's causing a lot of distraction and difficulties for the interpreters. So I just want to just caution him on that. I know that he's worried as much as I am about the interpreters. So the Honourable Member for Calgary Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's the first time I've heard that complaint, and I don't know if it's too loud when I flip a page or what, but I apologize. Anyways, I do have pages here, and I do have to flip them, so we do have to go off of significant preparation here. The issue, and I'll put this away for this time, Madam Speaker, because of that, and I'll just go from what I know of this subject matter as opposed to the notes I have. We have done a lot in this country. We've overspent tens of billions of dollars in this effort and gotten nowhere. And where's that money gone? I think Canadians need to know. Where has that money gone? It's gone into a bunch of self-serving organizations that this government uses, and I used the word before, and I mean it very clearly, they are paid propagandists. Effectively, you look at the International Institute for Sustainable Development getting $30 million from this government to pursue efforts that are all over the map as far as what it's measuring, and they have no expertise in actually delivering. The Canadian Climate Institute was at one of our committee meetings not long ago, and you take a look at what they're actually delivering here, and they're getting, at that point in time, $11 million, going up to $30 million. They are actually giving advice to the Department of the Environment. Now, giving advice to the Department of the Environment, because the Department of the Environment has no advice of their own, it effectively is now a department that is captured by special interest groups that gets paid a lot of money to be special interest groups, and therefore spins that wheel. Canadian taxpayer dollars going out the door, all kinds of organizations and individuals getting rich, and I can name who those organizations and individuals are, Madam Speaker, if we have more time, but I notice you've given me the 1 minute sign here, so I'm going to wrap up. We're not accomplishing anything in the environment. This government needs to acknowledge that. The Commissioner of Environment and Sustainable Development has acknowledged it. beseech my colleagues on the other side of the House and the other two opposition parties to read the report. Read the report that says we're accomplishing nothing, we're spending tens of billions of dollars, and we're getting nowhere. What more clarity do you need in order to make this understandable that we need to actually focus on technologies that are reducing carbon emissions in Canada as a benefit for the whole world? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Government Deputy House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I don't expect the member to answer my question because he never really does, but I'll say this to counter some of the false narrative in there. He said that our emissions are just slightly reduced since before COVID. The reality is this, Madam Speaker. Our emissions right now are at the same level they were at in 1998. But what's the huge difference between now and then? Our economy was worth about $650 billion in 1998. Now it's worth $2 trillion. Our economy is 3 times the size that it was in 1998. We have the exact same emissions that we do now. But you know, I would love for him to reflect perhaps back on the days when Stephen Harper was Prime Minister, when the economy was stagnant or even going down, yet emissions were continuing to rise up. So although I appreciate his rhetoric, it is nothing more than that.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I don't know how to respond to that member because I think I've answered every question he's ever asked in this House of Commons. But I'll say to him again in direct response to what he said, I don't know where he's getting his numbers, because the numbers that I've seen very clearly from his government's department on the emissions in Canada is that we are now around where we were in 2019, not 1998, and that's just pre-COVID. So we're going down to where we were before the economy collapsed at this point in time, and then we rose back up. 1998, I don't know where he's getting that number at all, but this is my answer to his question. I hope he appreciates the directness of the response. There's no rhetoric in my speech at all, Madam Speaker. What we're talking about here is spending tens of billions of dollars and accomplishing nothing. What Canadians need to see is where did that tens of billions of dollars go, and how do we make sure we're actually getting results for the money we're spending and what we're doing for Canadians. Thank you very much.
Questions et commentaires, l'honorable.
The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Madam Speaker, it's clear that the holiday season is approaching because everything's a little bit surreal right now. We're not anywhere near reality right now, Madam Speaker. Earlier I heard a Liberal member saying that he was proud of his party's record. But listen, let's get back to reality here. In La Presse on November 7th this year, when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, the article said that Canada has the worst record of the G7, the worst record of the G7. And, you know, our Liberal friends are apparently proud of their record, but now we hear the Conservatives who suggest that we do even less to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So, listen, this is, it's clearly the holiday season. Everybody's thinking about something else. So, according to a recent study in 2022, Canada spent $50 billion directly or indirectly subsidizing the oil and gas sector. I'd like to know if my colleague thinks that, I'll remind my colleague that this industry made $220 billion of profits in 2022. We gave them $50 billion in tax money. Does my colleague not think that this money would be better used if we had built social housing? The Honourable Member for Calgary Centre. Well, I'd like to thank my colleague for the question, but it's interesting, he's attacking the Liberals who aren't, accomplishing anything when it comes to the environment. And he's right to say that. But after that, he continued. He went on by indicating that the Conservatives, or rather the Government of Canada, had given $50 billion to the oil and gas sector. Well, Madam Speaker, that's a joke. They've given almost nothing to the least this sector. And he should recognize the facts that this needs to be revisited.
The Honourable for New Westminster, Burnaby.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate my colleague, but when he says, Conservatives want to be prudent with money, the Harper regime was the most outrageous shoveler of money towards billionaires and banks in our country's history. Just go through the numbers, Madam Speaker. $116 billion in liquidity supports to Canada's big banks. Harper regime. We have the overseas tax havens that cost us $30 billion a year, according to the BBO. Again, Harper regime, and shamefully, the Liberals have not ended that practice of $30 billion a year going to overseas tax havens and tens of billions of dollars going to oil and gas CEOs. So Conservatives shovel money off the back of a truck. If you're a billionaire or a banker, you get that money. But what they did cut were all the programs on clean energy, including Eco Energy, which Canadians stepped up to, and the Harper government cruelly ended and shut down so many of those small businesses across the country. How can the Conservatives possibly say they're credible when they did that?
A brief answer from the honourable member Calgary Centre.
Well, a brief answer. I don't know where that member's getting his facts either, because the government doesn't give any money to executives of petroleum companies across the country. It is a productive sector, and when it's doing well, all the employees do well. When it's doing poorly, take a look at the employment losses that happened over the last 8 years while we were in Parliament here. It's only bounced back in the very near past year, the last 2 years. So there is some significant misinformation that I think comes from that member. I don't know what he's referring to in a government a decade ago that had to deal with fiscal prudence, but I do agree with him that the Conservatives are looking at where we need to spend money effectively in the economy, because frankly, this government is going broke.
Yes, and I just want to remind members, if they want to have conversations while someone else has the floor, and this is on both sides, that they should step out to do that or wait until their turn comes up to speak.